Thanks for pressing play. Legends and Losers is sponsored by our friends at Oracle NetSuite. Are you ready to turbocharge your growth? Then check out netsuite.com/legends and the new #1 bestseller by Heather Clancy and myself, Niche Down. Check out nichedownbook.com. Today we hang out with the amazing Dr. Jacob Towery. He is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. He's a graduate of Duke and the University of Virginia and a Stanford Hospital Fellow. And he's also the author of an outstanding book called The Antidepressant Book, a practical guide for teens and young adults to overcome depression and stay healthy. We have a captivating conversation about how to raise mentally strong kids, what to do if you think a child or frankly anyone in your life is having a mental health problem. How do you handle it if you think somebody in your life might be suicidal, and why it's very cool for a doctor to rock a mohawk. All right. The Ramones said, hey ho, let's go. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Hello, my legendary friends. Welcome to this fantastic, very important episode of Legends and Losers. I'm really stoked you're here. We aspire to have conversations we're sharing, explore how legend and loser is actually two sides of the same coin. And we try to have conversations that you think are worth sharing. Today we have a very special guest who was introduced to me by my friend, Dr. Julia Halley from Stanford, and I'm stoked to share this conversation with you. If you want to learn more about Dr. Jacob Towery, check out our show notes at legendsandlosers.com. Also, hey, check it out anyway because we have a brand new version of legendsandlosers.com, and if you haven't subscribed to be on our mail list, go ahead and do that. Dr. Jacob Towery is a fascinating guy. We have a riveting conversation, and I think a conversation that is more important today in the United States than maybe ever before. Here he is, the most legendary Dr. Jacob Towery.
Yeah, this was the plan. I actually concocted this plan way back when I was a almost fourth-year medical student. So this is way back in like 2005, 2006. I decided I wanted to be a psychiatrist like my father, but unlike my father, I wanted to see more teenagers and young adults. I decided I did not want to do pure medication management. I wanted to do more therapy. I decided that I wanted to not work with any insurance companies because I dislike insurance companies. I decided that I wanted to teach at a nearby institution. And I decided that I did not want to work myself to the bone. I wanted to have a balanced life and take vacation and enjoy my life. And now I have the pleasure of doing all of those things.
So it sounded like you were very thoughtful about, if I could use this term, doctor, life design at a fairly young age.
Yeah, I had the luxury of seeing my father be a psychiatrist and see which things he seemed to like and not like and which things worked well and didn't work well. So I was able to use that information and my knowledge of my own predilections and kind of design my life. And now I have it and it's really awesome.
Yeah, you come across, as you might expect in preparation for our conversation, I've been consuming a lot of you, so to speak. And you come across in your talks and other public appearances and so forth as a very happy and affable kind of a guy.
Thank you. I am that way most of the time. I certainly have my moments of being grumpy and sad and irritable like all humans, but I prefer the other moments, which I'm fortunate to have a lot of.
So, and, just feel free to kick me under the table, so to speak, if you don't want to talk about this. But I got to ask you, what's up with the hairdo?
Yeah, so it's a valid question. So way back, like probably 4 or 5 years ago, I started noticing some friends and acquaintances that had mohawks. And I was like, oh, those are so awesome. I wish I had a mohawk. And then my first thought after that was, no way, I cannot get a mohawk. I teach part-time at Stanford. I'm a therapist. I'm a physician. There's no way I could get away with that. Maybe after I retire. I think after I retire, I could totally pull it off and then I don't have to impress anybody or be professional. So like that'll be a good time. And then it was about a year ago, I think it was last April, my son was in second grade at the time, and his school had this thing called Crazy Hair Day. And he came to me and said, Daddy, could I get a mohawk for Crazy Hair Day? And I was like, sure. I've never given a haircut before, but I do have these clippers I use for my beard. So if you're willing to have me give it a hack, I'm fine with it. He said, sure. So he got in the bathtub, and I took my clippers and just hacked away at all the hair on the side of his head. And I thought he looked really awesome. And he got out of the tub and said, this looks terrible. I don't really want this mohawk, but I'm willing to go to school tomorrow with it. But then I want to grow it out again. I'm like, all right. But then the next day he had this female friend, and she gave him this cool necklace from Hawaii. And the next day he had this awesome necklace on, and he had this mohawk, and I spiked it up, and he went to school, and he was so happy, and he was so confident, and everyone was coming up to him and saying how awesome it was. And he ended up winning this award for like craziest hair at his school. And I was like, if my 7-year-old son can do this, like I could pull this off. I'm just going to go for it. And the next day I was getting my hair cut anyway. So I asked if she could give me a mohawk. She said yes. And I loved it. We had matching mohawks for about a week until he hated it again and wanted to grow his out. But I've loved it. So I've stuck with it ever since.
That is so awesome. And I've seen video and photos of you without the mohawk, I assume pre-mohawk. And
yeah,
you actually look really different. And here's how different you look. Just this, hopefully you'll find this fun. So
sure.
When I first went to your website, there's a video of you on your website, and you're just sort of chatting about what you do and so forth, like an introduction video. And it is clearly pre-mohawk. And you look a very particular way. So I consume that, and then I read some of your stuff and this and that, and, various references on the internet. And then I think, okay, well, I want to consume some more video. And so I find this video, and it's a gal who's getting ready to interview you, and she's sort of reading your bio. And the whole time she's doing it, the visual is pointed at you, but she's talking, and you're just sitting there. And this is how much I didn't think the guy with the mohawk was the same guy. I'm thinking, okay, maybe and you're a young guy, right? And so, and of course the mohawk I think makes you look younger, not older, right? Because I'm fucking 50. Most 50-year-old guys don't have mohawks. Anyways, I digress. So she's introducing you, and the camera's on you, but with the mohawk. And I've seen the video pre-mohawk. And so I'm thinking maybe you're like a patient of his who's going to be like the case study, and any second now they're going to actually pan back over to the doctor, and then when she's finished the introduction, it's just fucking you. Like, and I'm sitting there going, holy fuck, he's got a full-on punk rock, Black Flag, turn the amps up to 11, and get right after it like you're the bass player in Social Distortion kind of mohawk. Yeah.
Yes.
And you're a full-on, as they say in today, in the parlance of our times, legit shrink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I kind of feel like I'm getting away with something. I really expect to get a letter at some point from Stanford that says, please desist from this mohawk wearing. You are tarnishing our reputation, and we will reconsider having you on our voluntary faculty. I definitely had fears the first couple of weeks I got this that all my patients were going to fire me and say, we want a professional, or parents would say, we don't want you treating our child. But none of those things actually happened. The closest that happened was Stanford Psychiatry has this thing called Grand Rounds that they have most Thursdays, where they bring in someone to give a talk on a topic, and everyone can come for free and listen and learn about things. So I remember going to my first Grand Rounds after I got my mohawk, and nobody would talk to me. Like, nobody would even make eye contact with me. The other psychiatrists were completely ignoring me, and I knew it was because they were judging the hell out of my mohawk. And they were like, I don't even want to be associated with this guy. Like, who is this punk who thinks he can wear a mohawk? Like people who would normally talk to me would not even talk to me. So I felt like this outcast, and I was like, maybe I'm going to be like this pariah in the Stanford psychiatry community. And that lasted for several weeks. And then somebody came up to me and said, wait, Jacob, is that you? I was like, yeah, that's me. And he's like, I didn't even recognize you with that mohawk. And then we started talking. And then this started happening more and more. And literally like 8 or 9 people came up to me and were like, wait, I didn't recognize you. And it turned out that at least some good number of these people didn't even recognize me. They thought I was some new like professor or student or something. And so
I mean, look, it was on video for me, but I had no idea. I had no clue it was the same dude. Like, it didn't even enter my mind. And the other thing that I think is there's multiple things that I think are just cool about this hairdo business. But there's something, if a psychiatrist's job, and I'm going to make this up, so you tell me, what do I know? I got thrown out of school at 18. But if a psychiatrist's job is to help us understand our thinking and ourselves and make sense of our lives so that we can be happy, productive, successful, high-functioning human beings, plus or minus, is that sort of what a psychiatrist is working on?
I think that's a big part of what we do. Yes.
And so, but part of it starts with thinking and our relationship with our own context, our thoughts, ideas, our impressions, how we process the world. People are anxious, why, and, the interpretations we have. Anyway, a lot of thinking about thinking, yes?
Yes.
And so your hairdo immediately forces one to think about one's thinking, because when I look at you, I think Red Hot Chili Peppers. I don't think, psychiatrist, Stanford prof, et cetera, it's author, et cetera, right? And so there's something very cool about a person who essentially helps you think about things, whose hairdo forces you to think about some things.
Thank you. I appreciate you noticing that, because I think it would actually be really easy for me to go through life with a more conventional haircut and be like, I'm fitting into your expectation of a psychiatrist, a therapist, and I have a button-down sweater, and I am exactly what you expect. I think that would be easy for me to pull off, but I kind of like the challenge of being like, oh, I'm a lot different than what you expected. Like, good. Let's see if I can still get you to trust me and like me and warm up to me, even with this hairdo.
Yeah, I love it. And the only thing, and look, you're the doctor, I would encourage you, as a 3-time public company chief marketing officer, update the video on the website.
It's a good idea. I'm gonna put it on my to-do list right now. I have a lazy side that resists doing things, but there is such a contrast between the video and the. I think you're right. Okay.
Yeah, they got to all match up.
Video.
The other thing, while I'm
that
thinking
would be
about
better.
it, and this might be a completely mental, over the top suggestion, but I'll say it because it's on my mind. And I was just talking.
Okay.
I was just talking to Jamie about this. So, one of the co-producers of Legends and Losers, his name is Jamie J. And and Jamie has got a very distinctive look. He's got one of those sort of long, cool, sort of bikery style, but sort of that long with a bit of a rectangle, like a tight rectangular cut sort of beard. So he's got that going on. And he often wears a baseball cap, and he's a podcaster himself, and he's just an iconic guy. And sort of, if you think about, Slash from Guns N' Roses with the hat and stuff, like, so Jamie has a very iconic look that sort of fits him very well. And long story longer, he turned that into like a bug or like a cartoon drawing, like a logo of himself. And it really works because he looks a very particular way, and then he turned it into this sort of cool drawing, logo-y execution. And so you could have one of those.
That's a really cool idea. My friend David Tilley is an amazing artist, and he actually does that for a living, is he makes those things for people. And maybe like 6 months ago, I said, I'm thinking about updating my profile picture. What do people think? And someone said, get one of those things done. So I'll talk to David. That's
Yeah.
not a bad idea, because this hairstyle feels so me that I can't imagine going back to something different. So I think this is here to stay. So
So
that
go
is a good
all in.
idea.
Go all in, doctor. Just own the shit out of
I
it.
like it. I like what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that would be really fun. And by the way, I think you'd sell
This
a
is a
lot more
brilliant idea.
books.
You're
Like
probably right.
I think it's going to help.
You might be onto something. And I know nothing about marketing and promotion. All I know is how to do therapy and write a little bit. So I'm very open to ideas that people who know more than I have. So I think it's a good idea, and I'm going to look into it.
Yeah, so my friend Heather Clancy and I just wrote this book called Niche Down, and it's subtitled How to Become Legendary by Being Different. And you're exactly an example of this, right? We tell people to follow their different. We live in a world that teaches us that what there is to do is fit in, what there is to do is color
Yeah.
inside the lines. And the degree to which we're going to do anything unique, well, we just try to do something better than somebody else. So, to get into the super ding dong schools that you got into, you had to be a better student and get better grades than a whole bunch of other people, right? And so, in a lot of ways, the world teaches us to be to fit in, and the degree to which we're going to, stretch ourselves, so to speak, is to just be better than somebody else. The world doesn't really say to us, "Hey, do a completely new thing." Be yourself, go mental, right? Be different, follow your different. Yeah. So
It's
I love
true.
it.
I agree with what you're saying. I think it's true. I am different. I like being different. I've almost never felt like I'm on the inside of any group. It's a common thing. I feel like an outsider. It's actually a very new thing. I now have a few groups where I feel like I'm staunchly on the inside, but most of my life I felt like an outsider and like I was different. So I like what you're saying about being different and just going for it and enjoying it.
Yeah, and so actually this leads me to a question I've been dying to ask you. Ever since Dr. Hallie introduced us, God bless her. I love that woman's my adopted sister. Um, and that is, I think there are some people for whom in life they try things and they say, oh, that's not me. Oh, yes, that's me, and so forth. And essentially, they end up, if you will, finding their place in the world. And then there's
Yeah.
another subset of us, and this has been my experience, that you do that. You do that in school, you do that in sports, you do that as you're growing up, and so forth. But then you sort of have this aha that sort of goes like this: there really is no place for me. And so you have this sort of almost existential crisis, and then you sort of either get crushed by it or you realize, oh, then what there is to do is go make a place for me. And so in my mind, and maybe it's overly simplistic, but there at a high level, there's two kinds of individuals. There's those type of people who find their place in the world, and there are those types of people who make their place in the world. And those two things can actually, while they share similar components, they can actually feel quite different.
I think you're right. I think that's a fair categorization, and I think it is harder to make your place in the world. But I think for some people like you and I, that ends up being a way better fit.
Yeah, when I first started to learn to play guitar, and I'm not a very good guitar player by any stretch of the imagination, but I couldn't really, I wasn't good enough to learn other people's songs. And so while I learned some other people's songs, of course, for the most part, all I wanted to do was write my own songs. And that's sort of the story of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's part of why I like going to things like Burning Man, is you see a lot of people who have just made their own place in the world and just decided, what I want to do is different enough. There's really not a thing for this, so I'm just going to make this. And it's inspiring. It's fun seeing people be different and do radical things and still make a living and support themselves enough they can do cool things in the world.
Yeah. Now, I was listening to one of your talks recently. I think it was the one was it in Menlo Park? And
Uh-huh.
and you said this very nicely. So I'm not going to say it nicely because you're a much better human being than I am. But I'm gonna paraphrase it in a less nice way. But I
Okay.
think what I heard you say is, "Hey, if you think your kids might be crazy, it might be you."
Yes, I probably did say something similar to that, but more diplomatic. Yeah, I think one of my messages to parents is before throwing 100% of your energy into getting your child help, it's worth pausing and seeing if you yourself have any issues that would be skillful to be addressed. And if you do, go get them addressed, because then you're modeling for your child getting help, and that treatment is okay, and that we ought to take good care of ourselves.
So I find it incredible and awesome that you're saying this, because we seem to live in a time where being that sort of direct about what many would view a very touchy, sensitive, personal, deep, meaningful topic. Like, it's a powerful thing to say, hey, if you think your kid's acting wacky, it might be you, and maybe you need to go work on something because the kid's modeling something. Like, people don't necessarily want to hear this, do they?
Yeah, it requires a lot of carefulness in the words that I use. So I gotta give credit. One of my main mentors in psychiatry has been David Burns, who's this best-selling author and professor at Stanford, and he's written a lot of great books. And he teaches this whole model of communication. And his idea is that you can actually say anything to anybody if you use this model that's very effective. So he's really into direct communication and has inspired me to be incredibly direct with my patients, with their families, with friends, with everybody. And so, but I do have to be thoughtful about it. Like, if I just say to somebody, you know what, you're the problem, your child's not the problem, you're the problem, that's going to go terribly and people will get defensive ASAP. But if I have a parent meeting and it's just the parents there, and I say something like, you know, your daughter mentioned that sometimes you yell at her and you swear at her. This is an example from yesterday, and you call her names. What do you think about that? And I'll just pause and like let them see how they respond. But often they'll say something like, yeah, I do that. And I'll say like, well, what's your sense of like how that goes? And then at some point they'll probably say something like, yeah, it's not so good. Like, she gets kind of scared and everyone runs and I feel guilty afterwards. So I'll be like, okay, well, what can we do about that? Like, what are your thoughts? Are there any options here? And I'll kind of steer people in a way where they'll be like, well, maybe I could, maybe this is worth doing something about. Okay, yeah, that's a great idea. I love that idea. Have you thought about maybe getting therapy to help deal with some of your anger? Because I know some great people. It's hard to deal with our anger. I myself sometimes get angry, and sometimes we don't know how to best deal with it. What are your thoughts about seeing somebody? So I have to be kind of a little bit gentle in how I steer people, but I'm definitely not afraid to address the elephants in the room.
Wow. As somebody who doesn't do what you just did, it's wonderful to hear you do it. Like, that was just like an Eddie Van Halen solo of like how to gently get somebody where you want them to be, so to speak, if I could make that comparison.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I would assume you mentioned, what was his first name? Burns?
Yeah, David Burns.
David Burns. So you learn this kind of gentle but still persuasive and directional communication style from him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a very generous man. He donates, him and Jill Levitt teach this 2.5 hour group every Tuesday night that's free to people in the Stanford community and even people outside the Stanford community, and they can go and they can learn this, how to do this model of therapy. which is Team CBT. It's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it includes how to communicate with people very effectively. And I have been in the group now for 11 years, and I love it. I learned so much. It's made me a better therapist, a better communicator, and now I co-teach in that group. So I feel really fortunate that it exists.
Well, and what I like about at least the way you sort of demonstrated the style, if I could maybe call it that, or the approach that you just did there, is when you first started, my context is, oh, this is going to be bullshitty. It's going to be that sort of mamby-pamby, politically correct, whipped cream on dog shit speech, but, we still know it's dog shit, right? And it's like, it kind of, at least for a guy like me who's very direct or prides himself on trying to be direct, that mamby-pamby speech makes me angry. So my assumption was, oh, this is just going to be like high-end therapist, mamby-pamby. But it actually wasn't. I mean, I could see that interaction, and you're genuine. You're not being schmarmy, and you actually are being direct in a gentler way than I knew was possible.
Thank you. And I think you're right. I think most people don't want whipped cream on dog shit. Most people don't want to be talked down to. Most people don't want some really long psychobabble. So I think it's learning how to communicate in ways that people like.
Yeah. So there's another set of another area that I've been dying to get into with you, and let me just make a comment, and then I got a bunch of questions. Whenever any of these horrible killings happen, these mass shootings that we have so frequently, and not that long ago, that asshole in Toronto who rented the van and drove it up Yonge Street, purposely trying to hit women. These sorts of mass violence, it's almost always men. And as a matter of fact, it's always men. And so when these things happen, I say to myself, I scream at the TV and I yell and I go and I hit the boxing bag and I scream and I cry. But I go back to this refrain, doctor, and the refrain in my head is, what the fuck is wrong with men? And look, I'm not a doctor, but I've started to do some of my own secondary research on this, and and I can walk you through some of the things I've been finding. But I want to get to you. It would appear to me that we're at a point in time where we as a society make a lot more good women than we do men. We have huge percentages of men now opting out of the economy, out of society. There are men who play 30 hours a week of video games, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the incidence of these mass killings is, of course, going up. And so I just go back to this refrain in my head, what the fuck is wrong with men? And so with all that said, is there something going on with boys, or am I misreading this? Or sort of what's your insight into the general mental health of young boys and young men?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's a great topic. I think that you're right about a lot of that stuff. I think it is almost exclusively men that are going out and doing all these killings. It is men that tend to be more violent. It's often men that are doing raping and a lot of consent violations and sexual assaults. I want to confess, I don't.
Were you as shocked as I was? As the Me Too thing came forward, I was shocked. And even before the Me Too thing started, my co-author and dear friend Heather Clancy was on an early episode of Legends and Losers, and we sort of got talking about the men and women thing at work. And I asked her a question, fully expecting a different answer, which is, how are things today versus when you started your career 25 years or so ago? And she said, they're no different. And I said, what? And then the Me Too thing came out. And so this is another area that I go, what the fuck is wrong with men? I feel like a bit of an asshole because I just didn't see it that much when I was an executive for the better part of 25 years. Like it wasn't present. And sure, there were some dumb things that, men did and said, and, I'm sure I wasn't always appropriate for the love of God. But I had no idea that this was going on and that women felt this and that men were the cause of, this level of suffering.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience to you, Chris. As a cis straight white male, I've had the privilege of not being discriminated against 99.999% of the time. So I was shocked when the Me Too movement came out. And then the more women I talked to, the more they were like, oh, yeah, it's a daily occurrence that I'm catcalled or I'm harassed or people say things to me. And then I later felt embarrassed that I was so shocked. And I'm actually really glad the Me Too movement happened because it's forced me to examine what are things I've done that have been terrible in the past. What are things people I'm around have done? What can I do? What can we do to make it better? And it was mostly like saddening and disappointing to me that men have been such assholes throughout time and have made the world much harder for women. And I feel like it's our responsibility to do better for future generations of boys and men.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then if you get to sort of, there's behavioral things which are not cool, and then there are these violent, horrible things, and these guys that do these, mass violent, horrible things. And so I guess I'm looking for maybe some insight or a little bit, maybe report card's not the right word, but what's your assessment of what's going on with younger men, boys, and why they're turning into the men that do these things?
And I don't totally know the answer. I want to confess there are some things where I feel like I'm definitely an expert on. This is an area where I think I know a little bit about. I do think testosterone, if it's unchecked, is problematic. We know that when you just give people testosterone, they become more aggressive, they become more violent, they become more irritable. So if you have boys and men that have just unchecked testosterone and they're in a climate that somehow allows this, and they don't have role models of how to use power and strength responsibly, I think you get these events that you're talking about, these killings and these violent episodes. And one of the things that I feel very fortunate is I've recently found myself in communities of men who want to do better. Like they want to have masculinity that is not toxic masculinity. They want to use our power for good. And I think that's my hope is where the world is going, is there will be more humans that stand up and say, yeah, well, what do we do with this power? What do we do with this strength? How do we use it responsibly so that we're not causing harm?
Yeah, very powerful. Now, I'm also curious, so if I'm a parent of a child, male or female, and I think something's up, something's off, and it's concerning me, and I'm considering maybe coming to see somebody like you, or maybe I'm just at the very beginning trying to get my arms around a good approach to mental well-being, if you tell me what I should call it, for my child. So I'm that parent. I'm beginning to have thoughts and concerns that maybe something's wrong with their mental health. From that point, what do you think a good parent would do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think pediatricians tend to be really awesome. I'm very fortunate that I have good relationships with a lot of the pediatricians in this area. And pediatricians have seen literally thousands and thousands of kids if they've been working for at least, 2 or 3 years. So it's always reasonable to start with your pediatrician and say, hey, I'm a little concerned. Something seems kind of off. What do you think? And if the pediatrician says, no, it's absolutely normal, there's nothing to worry about, then that's probably reassuring. And if the pediatrician says, yeah, this is really concerning, or I'm not sure it's concerning enough, then I think it's reasonable to find like a child psychologist or a child psychiatrist, and always start with an assessment. So start with somebody that you think is responsible, is reliable, that is not just desperate for getting the most clients, and just say, let's just start with, I just want to know what's going on. You could also get like a neuropsychological assessment or evaluation, but always start with, I think, just gathering more data before doing anything drastic.
And if I think I want to see someone, um, how do I think about a psychiatrist versus a psychologist?
And I think the internet might have gotten clunky from it. You
Yeah.
said if you want to see a psychiatrist versus a psychologist,
Well,
and then
let's say
was the follow up like, how do I decide? Or
yeah, maybe I don't know, right? I mean, I
yeah,
understand a psychiatrist is a medical doctor who can prescribe things, and a psychologist is not. So I get that part. But as a layman, that's all I really know. And so if
yeah,
I, let's say I have a child who's, having some anger problems, by way of example, we were talking about anger, and I've got to that place. I talk to my pediatrician. My pediatrician says, yeah, and you said I want to start with an assessment. How do I know who the right healthcare professional to go see is?
that's a wonderful question. Probably a lot of it depends on where you live. So, for example, if you live in like the middle of Nebraska and there's one person within like 50 miles, like go see that person. If you live in the Bay Area and you have 10,000 people you could go see, you don't necessarily need to start with a child psychiatrist if it's something like anger issue, because psychiatrists were more expensive than psychologists in general. So if you're not sure if your child will need medication or not, you could start with a psychologist or a therapist or a social worker. I would say as psychiatrists, we probably see more things like psychosis, like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder than the average psychologist. So if you think it's something like that, you could start with a psychiatrist. Or if there's a psychiatrist that you know and like, or people around you have recommended, you could go see them. But it's also often more cost effective to start an assessment with a good psychologist. And there's some amazing neuropsych assessment people that are psychologists that do really thorough assessments. So if cost is an issue, you could always start with like a really good psychologist.
Awesome. That's great. And let you mentioned bipolar. Um, if I'm well, I think I am. Pretty sure I am. But if I think I have a child who's bipolar, what should I be looking for?
Yeah, good question. So bipolar disorder is misunderstood a lot. People throw the term around a lot. They'll say like, "Oh yeah, I have these crazy mood swings every couple hours, so I'm bipolar," or "This person's crazy, they must be bipolar." They'll just throw the term around. So bipolar disorder is a very discrete diagnosis. So about 1% of people in the world have bipolar disorder. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 2 is less severe, type 1 is more severe. With bipolar, the idea is that people would have um, chunks of time in which they're acting very typically, and then they would have some periods of time where they might be depressed, and they would have other periods of time where they are acting distinctly different from normal, and they might have what's called a manic episode. So a manic episode is 7 days or more in a row where someone is sleeping less than usual and they're feeling either euphoric or irritable, and they're having several other things, like they're being more impulsive than usual, more sexual than usual, they're starting things but not finishing them more than usual, they're talking faster than usual, their mind is racing more than usual, they're more easily distracted than usual, they are more grandiose than usual, or they think they have special powers. So if you're seeing a constellation of things like that, then it's definitely important to get an assessment, and seeing a psychiatrist would be a reasonable option because there's the option to prescribe if the person does have bipolar.
Wow, that doesn't sound all that abnormal for for me. A lot of that list. So, are there any other big areas of mental health that you think are misunderstood that parents need to know about? Doctor? Did I lose you?
So I think my internet split out from it. I think was your question, are there other areas of mental health that are misunderstood
Yeah, that you
that
think are
parents should know
important.
about? Was that
That
it?
you think are important for parents to know about. Yeah.
Oh, okay, there I am. Okay, what did you say?
I said. So we just talked about bipolar, yes, and I was curious: are there other areas that you think parents, other areas of mental health that are commonly misunderstood that you think parents should be aware of?
Okay, so and again, I apologize, my internet got a little clunky. So is the question, are there other areas of mental health that are commonly misunderstood that I think parents should understand?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, doctor.
Okay, no problem. Let me think. Which ones? There's so many areas of mental health that are misunderstood. Let's see.
One that comes to mind is ADHD and
Yeah,
the increase in medicating for ADHD. And I have it, and nobody knew much about it when I was a kid. And so, you just sort of had to figure that shit out. And obviously, there are options today that didn't exist in the 70s when I was growing up. And so, how do I, if
yeah.
I'm a parent, know, is my kid ADHD, or is it just called being a boy? And when is medicating a child for that, a really responsible, thoughtful, good thing to do? And when is it a really dumb idea?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad we're on this topic. I would say, Chris, probably about a third of my clients at any time have ADHD. So it's a really common diagnosis that we see as child and adolescent psychiatrists. I would say if you're a parent and you think that your child might have ADHD, it's worth going in for an assessment with either a really good neuropsychological assessment from a psychologist or a good child psychiatrist. So it's always good to start with an assessment because you want to make sure you have the correct diagnosis because there's ADHD hyperactive impulsive type, there's ADHD inattentive type, there's ADHD combined type. The good news is if your child or if you as an adult do have ADHD, there are treatments that are really, really effective. So for example, there are certain medications like stimulant medications that are about 90% of people who take a stimulant will get response from it. So it's way higher than in other areas of psychiatry. So some of my favorite cases have been helping kids that were really, really struggling in school. And then we got them on a medication that was helpful. And then school became much easier. There were less battles with parents over homework. The child's self-esteem was a lot better. They enjoyed school more. They weren't getting in trouble as often. So for me, I've seen a lot of success stories. So I think it's worth having a good conversation with someone you trust about, ideally a child psychiatrist that you trust, about whether medication is a good option.
Interesting. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, I've never been on medication for it. My life seems to be fine, but I don't know. Maybe it would be different. I mean, I chase a lot of zebras around, I tell you. and reading and writing is really brutal for me, and forget math.
Yes. I think that's a common experience. I can't even tell you how many teenagers I see and children who hate reading. And with ADHD, it's incredibly difficult. And then on a stimulant, it's much more doable. And unfortunately, the US school system, as you know, is really heavy on reading for lots of different subjects. So if kids have a lot of trouble with that, it makes school incredibly challenging.
Yeah. I found, for me, this is just a side note, that one of the things that makes a difference is I will consume the written book, because that's actually how I want to consume it, with the audio book at the same time.
Yeah.
And so when my mind starts chasing zebras or naked ladies, and I can't find where I was on the page, and the whole thing is a 15-minute exercise of bullshit, instead of that, I chase the zebra. The audio keeps going, which brings me back quicker, and then I know exactly where I am because of where the audio is. And so,
Yes.
do a lot of dyslexics do things along those lines?
Yes, and you are the reason I made an audiobook. I actually would not have made an audiobook, but I had so many patients with dyslexia and ADHD who told me the exact same thing, and I was like, I got to make an audiobook. So I made an audiobook so people can listen and read at the same
time. Well, God bless you.
Thank you.
Now, there is another sort of touchy subject I would like to talk about, and then maybe pivot to more, how do I raise a mentally, awesome child? But
Sure.
the touchy one is, obviously there's been a big light shined on suicide in our country of late, and some of the statistics around increases in suicides and increases to suicide hotlines, and they're pretty terrifying. And so maybe tell me a little bit about what does a suicidal kid exhibit behavior wise, and if I'm somebody who loves children in my life, how should I be thinking about suicide and being a good, in my case, uncle or parent or whoever you are in the child's life?
Yeah, that's a super important question. I think one of the things that makes it hard is that there are no absolute behaviors that someone who's suicidal will definitely do or not do. So it makes it more challenging. We do know that people who are impulsive are at higher risk for killing themselves. So if you see a child or a teenager or an adult who is doing a lot of risky things, like using a lot of substances or driving really fast on a motorcycle or not wearing their seatbelt or getting in trouble with the law or things that are on the impulsive side, they're definitely more at risk. We do know that people who are having insomnia are at higher risk for killing themselves. So if you know someone is not getting adequate sleep, that's important to address. We know people that are having a lot of anxiety are at higher risk for killing themselves. We definitely know that people who are clinically depressed are at significantly higher risk of killing themselves. So then you could ask yourself, well, what are people who are depressed? What are their behaviors like? So if you notice things like people isolating more than usual, that can be a red flag. If their grades start tanking all of a sudden, that can be a red flag. If they're a lot more irritable than usual, that can be part of depression. If they don't seem to enjoy things as much as usual, that can be anhedonia, which is part of depression. If they start giving away their belongings, that can signal that they're suicidal. Or if they talk about not being around or not being around in the future, that's worrisome. And sometimes people will say these kind of vague comments like, oh, I just don't want to be here anymore, or I want to be gone. And that's worth investigating further. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, tell me more about that.
So just paying attention to some of these signs. And then if I see somebody, a child in this case, exhibiting these kinds of signs, or, there's that radar that goes off. I think maybe in prior years when this wasn't as prevalent, maybe some of us would have thought, oh, maybe they're having a bad day or a bad week or whatever. And obviously our awareness is up now. And so if I see somebody, whether a child or not, but in this context, more of a child, a younger person, exhibiting these kinds of potential behaviors, what should I do as somebody who loves that child?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the best things you can do is just ask the person directly. Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself? Are you having thoughts of killing yourself? One of the biggest myths that has really hurt the suicide statistics and the amount of people killing themselves is this myth that asking someone if they're going to hurt or kill themselves is going to make them go out and hurt or kill themselves. It's just not true. There's no evidence to suggest that. And we do know that if you ask people, are you thinking of hurting or killing yourself? Many, many, many people will be honest and they will tell you, yeah, actually, I have been having thoughts. And then if you give them a safe space to air those thoughts and tell you what's really going on, you can have a much better sense of what's happening in their head. And if they say, yeah, actually, I am routinely having thoughts of hurting myself and I'm worried I might act on them, that's a great time to go in and see a child psychologist or a psychiatrist and get an assessment and see if they have something like depression or something that's treatable.
And what if they, say no or in some way deflect you and you still feel concerned that that might actually be the case?
Yeah, that's a good question because obviously people can lie. So that's where I think you want to look at the context. You want to look at the overall picture. So if everything is exactly the same in their life, except they're not cleaning their room quite as often, that's probably not that big a deal. Or if everything's exactly the same, but they went from getting straight A's, now they got like one B plus, probably not that big a deal. But if you're seeing a constellation of things, like they're staying out way later than they used to, or they're skipping school significant amount of time, or they seem to be doing a lot more substances, or they're not hanging out with their friends anymore. They used to go out with their friends on the weekend. Now they're staying home and just isolating in their room. If you're seeing a number of things, even if they say, yeah, everything's fine, you could say, well, I'd still like you to go in and talk to somebody. I'd really like to do an assessment. I'm kind of worried about you. And let's just see what happens. And you could always do an assessment.
Got it. Excellent. Now, maybe move a little bit more to the happier side of the equation.
Sure.
In our family, we have my niece is pregnant, and so we have a new baby coming. And
congratulations.
Thank you. Everybody's very excited, and it's very cool, and they're a spectacular couple, and so it's all the good things you want. Good, happy, successful people making hopefully more good, happy, successful people. And so in that regard, I wanting to be a good uncle and them wanting to be a good parent, you got a brand new, essentially a hard drive coming out with not much data on it other than some genetics. How do we raise this child as a family and them as a couple to be a mentally well, strong, successful, productive, relatively well-adjusted, good human being that has a good life?
That's a wonderful question. Well, first I want to confess that I don't think I'm the absolute authority on this. I think if I had a definitive answer and said all of the research points to do these three things and everything will turn out fine, I would be a multi-billionaire and everyone would buy my book and we'd all have perfect children. I don't have it down that pat.
And maybe there'd be a lot more Mohawks in the world.
I could have little Mohawk babies running around the world. Yeah, so I do think there are some things that we know. So one of the things I tell all parents, like we alluded to earlier, is if you have your own mental health issues, go get help. There's the website called feelinggoodinstitute.com. There's this place, Feeling Good Institute, that offers really high quality teen CBT. And they now have people in lots of different states, multiple countries. So get good quality therapy. If you have mental health issues, don't leave it unaddressed. Go get treatment. Your life can be a lot better if you are mentally healthy. I think we know that if parents are generally happy themselves, they're then modeling that for their children. So another lesson I give to parents is do things that make you happy. So yes, be a good parent, but do things you really enjoy. If you love playing golf, go out and play around the golf. If you haven't gotten a massage in a couple of years, go get a massage. I love reading fantasy novels. I routinely take time and just read fantasy novels. They have no redeeming value. They don't make me smarter or a better person. I just like them. If you like being in nature, I love just going camping. Just because I like being in nature, go camping. So do things that you actually enjoy, not that make you more money or that make you more productive or smarter, just that you enjoy. And then you're modeling that for your kids. Give your kids a lot of love. We know that whatever your goals are for your kids, if you are loving and warm, that's better than being cold and aloof and neglectful. I think I'm listening to an audiobook right now called Grit by Angela Duckworth, and it's about how to raise gritty kids. And I'm on a chapter right now. She's talking about you can be loving and warm and you can still have expectations for your kids and you can set limits. They're both possible. So I think that's good to encourage your children to work hard and try things and also be loving and warm. Encourage flexibility. So routine is good, but it's also good to mix things up and encourage your children to try new things, try new foods, go new places. What else can I say? Be in a healthy, happy, romantic relationship. I can't even tell you how many couples I see that sit on opposite sides of my couch as far away from each other as they can. And they basically hate each other and have contempt from each other, and then wonder why their children might choose romantic relationships that suck. Like, well, you're modeling having a crappy romantic relationship. So don't do that. Consider having a really warm, awesome romantic relationship. That's a lot harder than it sounds, but either do the work to make it happen or find a new partner. I really think if you have a good romantic relationship, you're modeling that for your children. So those are a few things, ideas.
I love it. It's a great list, and I think an important list. I saw a stat recently that roughly only 25% of the children in our country grow up in a two-parent household. And so that was a startling piece of data to see.
Yeah. And even if you're divorced or you're a single parent, like, do things that make you happy. Try to be your happiest self, whether or not you have a partner. Go be generous. Another one I wish I'd added to the list earlier. Be a generous human. Go out and do community service. Go out and do things for others. Kids really want to imitate us. So if you model self-centeredness and just thinking about yourself, your kids will probably do that too. And if you model for them going out and doing good things for other humans in the world, they will want to do more of that too. So make that an important part of your life if it's not already huge.
Yeah. And, actually that works with human beings too, or with adult human beings.
Absolutely.
One of my giant pet peeves is, people who throw garbage around. And my dear friend, an adopted brother, Matt, when we're out mountain biking or whatever, if he sees something thrown on the side of the trail, I mean, he stops, gets off his bike, puts that Coke can or whatever it is in his camelback and keeps going. And I hate that stuff as much as he does. And I hadn't done that. And I thought, why don't I do that? And then I just thought I'm going to do that. And I pick up cigarette butts and, so we can learn that from each other as adults too.
It's so true. I admire that behavior because you're making the world a better place. It seems small, but getting rid of garbage and just leaving nature more pristine, you're making the world better.
Yeah, you can't put look, if you want to smoke, but you can't put a cigarette butt out in the world because at least where I live, it ends up in the ocean and it ends up in bird nests and gives them cancer, and it's really fucking bad. Yeah, and
I agree.
Look, we might not be able to save the world on big things, but when you pick up a Coke can, you made a difference, right?
Absolutely. I alluded to Burning Man earlier, but I don't know if you've been, but one of their principles is leave no trace. So their goal is to leave the area where everyone's having their camp as good or better than you found it. And I think you can take that back into everyday life. And when you're in the world, go out and make the world as nice or nicer than when you found it. And picking up Coke can is that attitude. You can bring that to anything and make things better than you found them.
I think it was John Muir who said, leave only footprints, right, when you're in the woods.
Yeah.
So, Doctor, is there anything else that you'd like to touch on today?
Good question. Let me think for a sec. Nothing burning. I feel like we covered a lot of fun topics, so I'm feeling good about things. What about you?
I guess one other question is, are you working on or any thoughts about another book?
Yeah. Let's see. I was very fortunate that I was contacted by a publisher about writing another self-help book for teenagers on a different topic. And she contacted me very shortly after I published my first book. And I was like, I cannot do it right now. I am tired. I need a little time to recoup. But I might have another book in me. I actually enjoyed writing the antidepressant book more than I thought I would. And making the audiobook was pretty fun. So I think there's a book brewing that might be equally applicable for adults and teenagers, that might be something about how to lead an optimally happy and healthy life for everybody. I don't know when it will come out of my brain, but there's something brewing in there.
Yeah. The other thing I wondered as I, was consuming all your stuff, you're clearly a talker, as am I. And I think you even say that. And so I thought, well, like a podcast. You should have a podcast.
It's a good idea. I think my lazy side has been the most resistant to actually, because it's a lot of work to do a good podcast like you do. So I think for the moment, I'll probably go on other people's awesome podcasts. I'm having the privilege of getting to do a podcast tonight with Feeling Good podcast on shame attacking exercises. So I think for the moment, I'll go on other people's fantastic podcasts, but perhaps down the road, I will do my own thing. It's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's worthy of consideration. And, there's a way to get out there on podcasts, and I'll just do a plug for my friends at Interview Valet. They're an agency who specializes in booking subject matter experts on top podcasts, and if not them, then there are others. But, there's a way to be on, almost like having your own podcast by being a podcast guest. But I still think you should think about it.
I will definitely give it some thought. It's a good idea. I do have a lot of things to say, so yeah, I'm gonna store that in the back of my mind.
All right. Is there anything else, Doctor?
I'm feeling good.
All right. Well, I can't thank you enough. You're a riveting guy. I really appreciate your generosity and your humor and your insights. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed this too. You made this fun and easy, so I really appreciate you having me on the show, Chris.
Dr. Towery, it's been all my pleasure. Thank you so much, and I look forward to chatting with you again.
Sounds good. Have a good one.
Thanks, brother. Wow, there you have it. If you know somebody who would love this conversation, why not share it with them right now? There's a share feature on your podcast application that you could email it to them. And we would love you just a little bit extra if you shared this episode right now on social media. Your shares make a giant difference to me. They help us grow the show and get the word out. So thank you so much. Also, want to let you know we're going to be doing more question and answer episodes, including some Q&A episodes with Bix and Joe Bixen. So email your questions for me or Bix and Joe to blackhole@legendsandlosers.com. And if you're a Twitter person, you can follow me. I'm at lochhead with 2 H's on Twitter. Is it grow time in your business? If it's grow time, check out netsuite.com/legends. And while you're there, you'll be able to set up a 1-hour free growth review. Now, in a recent study by SL Associates, NetSuite customers reported stunning improvements in key performance metrics after switching to NetSuite's cloud-based business management ERP software. Incredible metrics like 10% increase in revenue. Who wouldn't like that for Christmas? It's too early for Christmas. 80% increase in business insights and a 5% increase in gross margin. It's time to get growing. NetSuite is the platform for small entrepreneurs, from the garage all the way to the IPO, for running every aspect of your business. And NetSuite is available at a surprisingly cost-effective price. So it's time to get growing. Go to netsuite.com/legends and set up a 1-hour growth review with an expert in your industry today. All right, we would like to thank the Antidepressant Book, a practical guide for teens and young adults to overcoming depression and stay healthy. Niche Down, How to Become Legendary by Being Different, the #1 Amazon bestseller. Check it out on Amazon or at nichedownbook.com. The official coffee of Legends and Losers, Verve Coffee, the leader in West Coast craft coffee in Santa Cruz, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Tokyo, and always at vervecoffee.com. The amazing people at onelifefullylived.org, the nonprofit helping you dream, plan, and live your best life. Check them out, onelifefullylived.org. the spin-off of Legends and Losers, where we combine segments from this podcast and we set them to music in these new tracks. Think of it as a new kind of a motivational, inspirational audio experience. Check out 6 Minutes of Legendary on Apple Podcasts. EquityDirectory.com. Are you in the startup ecosystem? If you are, then you need to be on Equity Directory. Check them out. Are you in sales? Do you want to improve your sales? Are you a salesperson or a sales manager who likes to make more money and wants to have a smart technology that helps them do that? Check out Spiro, SPIRO.ai. The official sock provider is is John's Crazy Socks. Check out johnscrazysocks.com. And if you haven't listened to episode 155 with John's Crazy Socks, it'll change your life. Check it out. Is it time for a virtual assistant? You're getting a little busy? You need some help? Check out Bottleneck Virtual Assistants at bottleneck.online. Why not leverage the power of a virtual assistant? And we would also like to thank Stanford Medical School. Check out med.stanford.edu. All right, this oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we would love it if you shared the shit out of it. All rights do remain disturbed. And we must warn you, this oddcast is clearly produced in a studio that does contain nuts. Teach mental health. Remember to save water, and there's a water crisis here in California, so shower with a friend. There's no stopping the cretins from hopping. Go ahead, it's okay. You can pee in your wetsuit. Thank you, Dandy Candy. I love you, Mom and Dad. And hey, Colin, this oddcast really ties the room together, doesn't it? Today, our deepest apologies go out to Kim Kardashian. Sorry, Kimmy. We just ran out of time for you. That's it. Thank you so much for investing part of your life with us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon here on Legends and Losers.